Copenhagen. Well, I think the first thing you should know about in Copenhagen was that it was a very big mess, I would say. The organization, the meeting itself, and nothing happened which was planned before. It didn't work the way it was planned to work. You know how it is in these meetings. You usually stop by negotiators, and after the ministers come and the head of states are invited, they have a dinner with the Queen, and after they go to bed and take a picture, family picture, and sign it. It didn't happen at all that way. The ministers were not able to unstuck, I would say, the negotiations. And there was some clumsiness where the negotiators were mixed up with the ministers, and the ministers were mixed up with the head of states. People didn't arrive on time and on schedule, so it was very complicated. And when the head of states arrived, nothing was ready. It was incredible. So I think it's one of the first meetings I ever see where head of states actually decided, let's get to work, and spend the complete night to work. It's incredible. So they spent 2 nights actually, and 1 whole day, negotiating themselves and writing the accord. It's incredible. And of course, they didn't have time for the family, for the picture. And once all these head of states went away, and having written the accord, you had some junior representatives of 5 countries which said, "Oh, it's not democratic. We cannot agree with the accord because we were not in the small, stuffy little room where everything was decided." And I was, for a certain time, in this small room where you had 28 countries and no translation. It's incredible, and nothing to eat, I would say, roughly. And the head of states working, and they got out. They got an accord. So I think one of the first things you could recognize is, luckily, the head of states came. And perhaps this means that the negotiations on climate change are so important, so difficult, so comprehensive, because it's to reshuffle the whole world economy, roughly. It can only be a matter of head of states. So that's my first conclusion. I would say it's a matter of head of states. And it's very difficult to ask for ministers of environment to do the whole of the deal. Some ministers of the environment are in a situation which was like in Europe 20 years ago. Very, very junior ministers. Some countries, like in Germany, the Minister of the Environment has become Chancellor. Merkel was Minister of the Environment. Some countries, like France, the Minister of the Environment is number 2 after the Prime Minister. He's Minister for Environment, Energy, Housing, Transport, roughly everything. Because sustainable development is such a huge problem. And so if you are in charge of the environment, you have to be in charge of everything, roughly. But of course, it's not the case for everywhere. And of course, when you engage the finance and you have these margins, only head of states have margins to negotiate and to be able to understand the whole issue. And sometimes defend the interest of the planet and not only the interest of your country. I mean, it's difficult to do. So we have an accord. In my view, the accord has 2 very important steps forward. So, of course, there was some disappointment because it was not complete, not comprehensive, and not a huge, beautiful, super comprehensive, legally binding accord. We'll talk about that after. But you have 2 major two steps. The first one is concerned big emitters together. It's the issue of transparency, which we call in our negotiations NRVs. The problem at that time, because Massachusetts was still Democrat in the United States, and there was a law pending in the Senate, is that no American senators would have agreed on the bill if you didn't have knowledge and information of what China and India are doing, especially China, I would say, for the United States. And in the end, it was a compromise proposed by India, by Minister Ramesh. Minister Ramesh in India is a very interesting character. He makes scandal every 2 days in the newspaper, and he has to go backwards all the time, but he's sort of 2 steps ahead and 1 step back. So he made a compromise saying that, China and India are willing to talk about what they are doing, the reductions they are making, the actions they have decided upon, etc., every 2 years, etc. So transparency, one thing. And the other was about vulnerable countries, because in the United Nations you have to have a majority. And it's a mistake to think that it's only with the bigger emitters that you can have an agreement. You have all Africa, you have all the least developed countries, you have all the small islands, and the small islands are very important. They play a very important moral role because they're going to disappear first, as that's what they say in any case. So They're playing an important role. And so this was the pledge for $100 billion a year as from 2020. Very important. Now, of course, this pledge has to be fulfilled in a way or another. Then that's going to be another problem. But I mean, that's why in Copenhagen there was an agreement, because the whole of Africa and small island states left the G77, I would say in one way, and agreed with the European Union and the others. And for those who were not in Copenhagen, I can tell you that the first item, transparency, was an Obama fulfillment, achievement, because Obama he waited for 7 hours to Eugene Tower to receive him, but he stuck there and wanted to be received. So, because China, actually, in my view, China was playing on a failure. They thought it was not going to happen, and so they were sort of organized to accept the failure, I would say, in one way or another. But Obama, got that transparency, and I remember very well. I was with Sarkozy, and in the end, the European Union, because it was mostly United Kingdom and France, which got all the developing countries in Africa to agree to the accord. That was the diplomacy we had for a long time. I remember very well Gordon Brown arriving, and Chancellor Merkel, and all the Europeans, roughly, Barroso and the Swedish presidency. And in the end, Obama arriving with a piece of paper, with having it in Chinese and in English, and Sarkozy saying to Obama, "So you speak Chinese now?" And that sort of head of state jokes. And at that time, the question was, are we going to agree to this accord, which is not very good, but nevertheless, we have everybody on board. So the question of having everybody on board, is it the best? The best assessment you can have of an accord, even if you don't think it's enough? But that's the way it happened, and it's so true that you have under the Copenhagen Accord, one side is for the big emitters, the other side is for the vulnerable countries, that all the middle-income countries were not at all taken into account. And middle-income countries, for instance, after the Copenhagen Accord was agreed, they telephone and they say, "What are we going to do? We don't have our figures yet ready. Are we going to send them?" etc. So our diplomacy right now is to go to middle-income countries and to say, no problem, take your time. We'll be happy to have your figures as soon as they are ready, but there's no rush. So, what's so interesting in this? So, all the other things, items, you talk about the items, you talk about RED, you talk about the forest, nothing was done there. So, the most important of these two big points. And MRV, transparency, was like a substitute for reductions. It was more important to have an agreement on MRV, verify. MRV means measure, report and verify. More important to have that than to have the reduction, I would say. That's how it happened politically in Copenhagen. And with the emission reductions, well, that's true. That's probably what's going to happen now after Copenhagen, is that we are slowly going to a sort of a pledge and review process. And for the European Union, it's true that we still think that all our process and all our negotiations should be headed by science, and the science tells us to not let the temperatures increase over 2 degrees Celsius in 2100. And so the science tells us, IPCC report, etc. So you must not go over 450 ppm of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, blah 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 blah. No, we probably will be on for the time being on a pledge and review. We're doing our best. Each country, one after the other, we're doing our best. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to review this as soon as possible. Nevertheless, we have agreed on 2 degrees Celsius, which was already agreed in G8 in Aquila in July. So China agreed on 2 degrees. They were the most reluctant on 2 degrees, because they are afraid the consequences of 2 degrees is going to be a share of the carbon space of the atmosphere. What are you allowed? I mean, if we must not go over 450 parties par million, I don't know how you say that, party per million, okay, and we're already at 380. What's left to get to 450 Will it be all for us, developing countries, or are you going to take some more, you America, you Europe, etc., etc.? So there's a discussion, and Chinese did not want to get into this discussion. They are afraid of the consequences for their own development and growth, which I think is more important than people thought at the moment of the disappointment. It was in Europe. It was in Copenhagen. There was 3 times more young people than the place could contain. It was terrible. We had to queue for half an hour to have a sandwich. I mean, it was really complicated to negotiate. I mean, everything was done to make it complicated to negotiate, okay? But I mean, well, first, we believe we have to implement the accord. Implement. I can say it 10 times. That's the most. Don't wait to have don't wait to have an agreement which is going to be legally binding. Implement. And this is why in France we're going to have a meeting on the 11th of March on forest issues. Okay, let's do it. And for instance, that's why we have decided a certain amount of countries to go on what we have called the fast start. Fast start, okay. Even if we don't have a complete legally binding agreement, let's start. Do it. You know, when I was young, there was a book like that. Do it. Don't argue. Do it. Okay, so we're going to do it. And start the implementation of the forest reduction. My president said if deforestation amounts to 20% of the problem, okay, let's have 20% of the financing flows going to forest. Boom. Okay, simple. Let's do it. And so we're going to start doing that. And the other most important part, politically very, very important in our view, how are we going to get to, have $100 billion a year as from 2020 going to the most vulnerable countries? How are we going to achieve this? Because we know that we have all our countries are broke. We have no more money in budgets. And in any case, how can we make commitments for a parliament which is not yet elected? I mean, it's impossible. So the Copenhagen Accord has agreed that Mr. Ban Ki-moon is going to convene a high-level panel on financing. High-level panel on financing, including innovative financing. That's written in the accord. What does this mean, including innovative financing? It means international taxation. That's what it means. Sorry to say it, but I mean, it means that you will never find enough money if it's going by budgets and discussions. Never. And in the end, if this world is one world, and if we are serious about solidarity and about redistribution and all that, and about how we're going to help each other, well, we have to get one moment to international taxation. So will it be on bankers? Is that in the discussion? Bankers from maritime or from airplanes? Will it be taxation on financial transactions? It's going to be discussed in this high-level panel, and this high-level panel is going to report to the negotiation track. We have to fill the gaps. So we implement and we fill the gaps. What are the gaps? Well, the Accord of Copenhagen talks about technological cooperation, but what does it mean? Nothing has been decided. We didn't have time. It talks about financial, the setting of a fund and things like that. I mean, once you agree, you said you're going to have $100 billion. And what are you going to spend it on? Please, because, I mean, it's important first is to know what you're going to spend the money on, what are the needs, and how it's going to come, and for what channels, because some people dream of a sort of big tower somewhere. A big tower in Bonn, where the majority of the G77 countries would decide of the $100 billion. No, it's never going to happen, of course. I mean, so how are we going to do it? Let's be serious about it, etc. This is in front of us right now. How are we going to do that? How are we going to have the financial flows? By which channels? Who's going to spend it? Who's going to be what's the governance? This is in front of us right now. So if you are serious about the Copenhagen Accord, we discuss on it. And now, let's get to the difficult problems. What is the juridical strength of the Copenhagen Accord? Well, I don't care, sorry to say. I mean, it's politically. We had head of states, okay? Head of states representing 5 billion people on planet Earth. They have agreed on the Copenhagen Accord, and you have people which are going to bother us with the legally binding whatever. Come on. These people have been elected. They are responsible in front of public opinion, in front of their own constituency. They have agreed on the accord. And it was something quite incredible to see junior negotiators. After the leaders had left, they stayed a long time, 2 nights and a whole day. They had left to take the airplanes back, and the junior negotiator of 2 or 3 countries said, no, it's not democratic. Come on. So I mean, okay. So now we have to sort of introduce all this into the UNFCCC normal track. And the problem is
that we are bumping on a problem which is called the Kyoto Protocol. That's a big problem. I'm talking about some of my colleagues here, and we know that it was a big achievement, Kyoto, but now Kyoto represents only 30% of the world emissions. So it's complicated to agree to have strong binding obligations and constraints only for 1/3 of the world emissions, while the United States and China are outside. And so that's a big problem. So we believe, now I don't know if I'm going to be quoted, so we believe perhaps that the Copenhagen Accord is going to replace the other protocol and going to become the implementing agreement of the Rio Convention, the next one, where everybody's on board, and we have to improve it and fill the gaps. This is the way we see it now. I mean, of course, for the European Union, we have already agreed to go 20% unilaterally. So if it's Kyoto or not, we don't care. But I mean, obviously, we have to change, and we have to take the best of Kyoto. The best of Kyoto. I mean, all our tools are based on Kyoto, and try to have a super Kyoto. I mean, Copenhagen must be the Kyoto Protocol with everybody on board. That's the aim, to make it simple in a way or another. So I think, nevertheless, there is a post-Copenhagen. And the post-Copenhagen was that before Copenhagen, we had a sort of a dream of a 20th century where we would have a super accord, a super comprehensive, legally binding agreement on everything. And you could see how it is, the negotiations. 30 workshops all the time on different issues, and it's impossible to follow. It's too complicated. But I mean, people believe, nevertheless, we're going to build a beautiful architecture, completely finished, and one day we're going to sign. It's going to be finished, and it's going to be good for 100 years. And you see, already we were happy because we had the convention, and the convention, once it's legally binding, and we are prisoner of Annex 1 and Annex 2 division. And the geopolitics has completely changed. And finally, when you have something you say is legally binding, you're a prisoner of it also. So I mean, it's complicated, but I think what's happening now is we're getting more pragmatic, and we're going to agree on sectoral agreements. We're going to work on pieces and work on forest. For the first time, the Minister of India said, well, if we have a separate agreement on forest, why not? Let's move. If we can get it, take it. Let's try. So things are moving in that way. It's not finished, but I think it's interesting. So I must finish now because 20 minutes are over. And I think this Copenhagen meeting was the first real meeting of the 21st century. I was very impressed to see it. First, you would see the new geopolitical system, the new geopolitical rapport de force. You could see China very arrogant. It was difficult to discuss with China. But you saw the basics, and the basics, Brazil, South Africa, China and India, they call themselves now the basic. The fact that they agree to meet together means they agree to be different from the rest of the G77, which is the first time. Very important. The small islands, I saw the small islands fighting against China. We want 1.5 degrees. We don't want 2 degrees because at 1.5 degrees, the coral starts to bleach and we're going to disappear. And finally, they got in the agreement a reference to 1.5 if science says you have to not go over 1.5. So the little islands against the Chinese, the Africans against the Chinese, Africa saying, come on, we have to stop the emissions, let's try. So things are moving. And if our countries are not serious about the financial pledges, they're going to go back in the arms of China and Brazil in the world. So we have to be very serious about all this. This was the first time we're discussing about the ecological problems of scarcity on planet Earth. Because after the climate, we're going to have the water, we're going to have all this. So we're trying to understand and invent tools to manage planet Earth, all these common goods. We don't know yet how to do it, but climate is obviously the driving force of these new negotiations. And we're going to have all these limits in front of us, and we don't know how to cope with these limits. We don't know how to invent the economical tools of having something collectively cheaper and more efficient of only the adding our national policies. So we are stuck between our national policies and what we have to invent. And this, for instance, in the Copenhagen Accord, we couldn't move, but we have written markets. So we have to work on the markets. Markets and the way we have organized the markets in Kyoto, the fact we have the clean development mechanism and things like that, by which we invent something which is more efficient than adding only our national policies. This is in front of us. We have to do this now. It's very complicated. We have to be imagination, etc. And in the end, governance. The governance of the world. How does that work? United Nations system where you have to have unanimity. Perhaps there was a bit of confusion between unanimity and consensus. Perhaps. But I mean, if you have to wait for 192 countries to agree to do something, including when I mean, head of states have left, and you are left after two nights you haven't slept, and you have these young guys saying we don't agree, but it's not democratic. I mean, it cannot work that way. So we believe now, and this is in front of us, it's our work, our imagination, our generation. We're going to have a meeting in Rio plus 20. Rio plus 20. Remember how it worked? It all started in 1972 in Stockholm, and we all invented in our national administrations, ministers for the environment, laws for the environment. That was the local environment. And after, in 1992, it was in Rio. Suddenly, it was biodiversity, it was the planet. And now, 20 years later, have we moved on the planet policy agenda? Have we invented the new governance system? Rio failed on the institution side. It's still the old post-Second World War United Nations system and economy. We haven't yet integrated the production of nature into our economical accounting rules, etc. So this is in front of us. Okay, ecological scarcity, the new geopolitical rapport de force of the 21st century, and the governance of the common goods of our planet. So it's very exciting. And Copenhagen was just the first step. All steps are going to follow now. It's very, very interesting time. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.